Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Richard Batts, and this is my ACTE 699 Action Research presentation. I am in the Assessment Curriculum and Teaching Master's Program with a STEM endorsement, and I currently teach biology at Central York High School. My action research project was using manipulates in a high school setting. Again, I teach biology, and I wanted to kind of see whether physical and virtual manipulates still had a place in a high school setting, along with their effectiveness of students learning the material and being able to manipulate the different cellular processes that we covered in the time that I was collecting the data. I also wanted to kind of see, if physical or virtual were better, if one was better than the other. I know technology has kind of taken off over the past couple of years. However, some schools still may not be able to afford one-to-one classrooms. So are physical manipulates still as effective as virtual? And vice versa, is virtual as effective as physical? So I wanted to kind of see if there was an impact on the students using these manipulates as compared to the traditional classroom setting. PowerPoint presentation, that sort of stuff. So my research questions, which I just kind of touched on a little bit, was what is the effect of virtual and physical manipulatives on student comprehension of cellular processes? By cellular processes, throughout the data collection time, we talked about active transport along with mitosis. So those were kind of the two aspects of biology that we covered through this research. Which type of manipulative, virtual or physical, has a longer term impact on student comprehension? With this one, I did a quiz a week after using the manipulates. I know it's not necessarily a long-term impact. However, most research that I'll talk about in a little bit that I saw was only a pre-assessment and then a post-assessment right away. So I want to see which one has that longer lasting effect. We want students to be able to, retain the information that they learn in, August, September, be able to retain it until they take the Keystone, until the final, and then again throughout their lifetime. So which one of these kind of had that bigger impact of retention with them? And finally, my last research question was, how do students react to the use of manipulatives in the learning process over traditional learning? So again, that goes back to, do they like using these manipulatives to learn, or would they rather, the traditional PowerPoint notes, that sort of classroom setting? Some background information. From the research that I found, 4 out of 5 of the research articles that I looked at had positive effects, meaning 4 of them from manipulatives, whether they were physical or virtual, had a positive effect on the students. None of them showed that it was harmful for students to use manipulates, meaning they didn't do worse on their post-assessment compared to their pre-assessment. They showed growth, that sort of stuff. Whereas the 5th one, it said that there was no statistical difference between using the manipulates and not using the manipulates. It said students still performed equally as well. Excuse me. Another thing that I kind of examined when I was looking at my research was that they only really examined one long-term effect, meaning 1 week following the manipulative activity. 1 out of the 5 articles examined that long-term effect. And again, 1 week isn't very long-term, but it is more long-term than right after the activity or the day after the activity. It gives them a little bit of a gap period to kind of forget what they did and see if they actually can recall it and do remember. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and that was something that I wanted to incorporate into my research. And then finally, some other background information was that the virtual manipulates had a higher initial post-assessment score. However, physical manipulates had a higher long-term retention. So in that 1 week after that activity, right here, that 1 week after, that showed that physical actually had a greater impact on them. So they could retain the information easier with the physical manipulate rather than the virtual. So the design of my experiment, I collected data from all 3 of my classes, which was a lot of data. However, all the students took a pre-quiz and a post-quiz at the beginning of the unit, and then the post at the end of the unit. That was for my active transport, which is cell transport, and then mitosis, which the unit is mitosis. So those were kind of baseline scores for the students to see overall growth. Wasn't necessarily specific to using the manipulates. Manipulate number 1, which was on active transport. All students completed a pre-quiz, and they all used paper models to represent active transport. When I say all students, I mean all 3 classes did the same manipulate, which was a physical manipulate. They then did a post quiz, and then I did a survey also, which you will see once we talk about the data, that asked them whether they thought it was effective or not very effective, if they thought it was helpful, if they enjoyed it. Some of those things just to kind of gauge where the students felt the manipulate was on their engagement aspect of it. And then finally, 1 week later, they took the same post quiz to see their retention. And now, one thing that I do want to note is that in between that 1 week time frame, students were exposed to review material, new content, all of that sort of stuff in between there. So it might have skewed the data in the sense that they got more review on that content, or that there was more information that they might have forgotten it, something along those lines. Moving into manipulate number 2, for a second set of data. Again, all students in all my classes took a pre-quiz. However, then I split it up between class 1, 2, and 3. Class 1 and class 3 did a pre-quiz, post-quiz, and 1 week later in a survey. However, class number 1 used a virtual platform to show mitosis. So they did all the different aspects of mitosis, the different phases, and that was on a virtual platform on their computer. Central York is a one-to-one school, so all my students did have MacBooks to do this on. And then class number 3 used physical manipulates to show the process of mitosis. So I gave them different supplies, and they had to kind of build the different phases of mitosis and kind of see how that worked that way. And again, the survey was the same survey as in the active transport, seeing where they felt engagement-wise with these manipulates. Class number 2 is my honors level class, whereas 1 and 3 are regular levels. So class number 2, I kind of left out, excuse me, and allowed them to do both, and then had them kind of complete a survey of which they preferred, which they thought was better, whether it was the physical or the virtual, which one they thought was more engaging and helped them better, to kind of gain a sense of students' opinions on both of them. So my findings from the research, here's kind of the raw data that I collected. I shouldn't say the raw data, it has all 3 classes in there, and kind of organized as average sense. So my survey that they gave me was if it was effective or ineffective, engaging or boring, easy or difficult, unhelpful, helpful, recommend or not recommend. And so the scale, the survey went from a -3, meaning it was very ineffective, to a 3, which they thought it was very effective. So all of my numbers, which turned out really well, are positive, which was great. Which means that majority, if not all of the students, thought that it did have a positive impact on them. They thought that it was engaging, it wasn't too easy, but wasn't too difficult for them, and they did think that it was helpful and would recommend it again, which is kind of really nice to hear and to see from the students. That one is for my mitosis ones over here for my different classes, and then here is my active transport. Again, class 1, 2, and 3, here there are different averages from it, and then overall average down here. So overall average period 2, which again is my honors class, they had a 1.66 average score for the active transport manipulates, which was the paper physical models of cutting out the cell membrane and showing active transport through the membrane, which I thought was really cool, and apparently the students enjoyed it as well. Some other graphs to kind of show what was going on. The first one here is should be period 1, but class 1, which shows that the students did have growth in the active transport and the meiosis. Active transport was out of 7 points, mitosis was out of 15 points. So again, there is growth from pre to post assessment in all of them, so they did have that growth period. And again, this was the post-assessment, which was directly after the manipulate. So there was no time for new information to be learned in between there. This was strictly pre, which was right before we did the assessment, or right before we did the manipulate, and post, which was right after the manipulate. Over here, my other findings, class 1, 2, and 3 for active transport, and then of mitosis. Here is kind of the overall class average compared to each one. So kind of baseline pre-assessment, class 1 in active transport, and class 3, since these were the two regular classes, was pretty similar, and then class 3 actually had a larger jump after the assessment. The mitosis one is the one that's interesting because this is the one where class 1 did the virtual and class 3 did the physical manipulate. So as you can see, class 1 had a lower starting point than class 3, whereas the final, they're pretty much even. So they scored the same on their post-assessment, which again was directly after their manipulate activity. Excuse me. However, class 1 had a higher jump to get to that point, which I thought was pretty cool. So in my conclusion, first and foremost, the action research was very time-consuming, analyzing the data, compiling it, and kind of seeing what the results said, and creating the assessments for students to use. I thought it was all very time-consuming. But I also thought it was very well worth it because I did learn that manipulates do still have a role in the high school setting. As you can see, that all the students did show growth, which is very impactful, and both physical and virtual are beneficial to the students. So one thing that's key about that is that if you're in a school district where you might not have the one-to-one setting, or you might be fighting for laptops or iPads, physical manipulates work just as well. As you can see here, they kind of both evened out at the same level, so not one had a higher impact on the other, which was really cool to see because that means, if you're at a school that doesn't have the laptops, please attempt to use the physical manipulates because it will still have a place in that school setting. And I do think it does depend on the students, whether they're used to using the computers or used to using, hands-on type stuff. However, overall, they both have a spot in the classroom setting, regardless of if it's elementary or secondary. And I know it was a biology classroom, but I'm sure manipulates have a place in all classrooms. Thank you guys for watching my presentation on my action research. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and it was a pleasure getting to know all of you this semester, and I hope you guys had a nice semester as I did. Good luck to you guys moving forward. Take care.